Hello everybody and welcome to Learning with Chrono. Today on this episode we will be covering the Watermill. As in the last episode of the Shenaniderp server, I was pleasantly surprised about the amount of power that they can output. Over here I have a replica of my basement, almost completely ready to test power consumption. And to do that, what we need is called an EU reader. And that's this little guy right here. Now we have 8 little Watermills going, and they're going about as good as they can go. So we plunk down a bat box, and we can see we're pulling in a pretty fair amount of power. So let's see if we can read just how much power is going through this. Well, something seems to be slightly amiss. It's saying there is 0 EU per tick traveling through these wires. Oh, and now it says negative 14 EU per tick. Well, that can't be right. Because if we look here, we can see, I would say we're getting maybe 20 per second. Maybe 14 per second? I don't know. But if we click directly on the Watermill, 0.16 EU per tick. Now, from what I understand on the wiki, one side of a Watermill with water is supposed to output 0.025 EU per tick. So 0.16 EU per tick doesn't seem that far off for one Watermill. But let's look into how these work a little bit. Alright, we'll start out simply. We'll plunk down the Watermill, and we'll plunk down a bat box so we can measure the power. And then we'll set it up so that we can have one water block directly beside the Watermill. Now I can imagine that would say 0 EU per tick because nothing's actually happening just yet. So, plunk that down, and we're not getting any power at all. Well, what does that mean? I'm not 100% sure. We have water. It should work. Now I know it doesn't have to be flowing water because still water is right here. This is 2 layers of still water with the Watermills just floating in the center. Let's try directly underneath. Plug a piece of water down there. So now we have one directly under. And it still doesn't look like we're getting power. What does that mean? Is the power supposed to come out the top? I don't think so. That doesn't make any sense. And yet now the power's coming out. That is very interesting. So we can see it's running very, very slowly. See if we can even get a EU reading off of it. Definitely not from there. 0.02 EU per tick. Okay, so if what the wiki says is correct, if I add another water block right here, we should have 0.5 EU per tick. And I right-clicked with the wrong thing. Alright, we're still getting power, so 0.03 EU per tick. 0.01. Well, I had heard that the EU reader is slightly glitchy. But I know the Watermills usually output so small of power. This is very, very unusual. Let's see what happens if I follow the wiki and give it a 3x3 section of water directly underneath it. That one says 2.25 EU per tick. And that's accidentally clicking on the bat box. So that's 0.09 EU per tick. Are we getting anything in the cable yet? 1.73 EU per tick. Something interesting's going on here. Now it's saying 0 EU per tick. Well, I'm going to assume that because we have such low amounts of power, that the EU meter's not working properly. So all we can really do to test is show how exactly the Watermill works. Now, we can see that it actually works definitely faster with a 3x3 section underneath it. So if we add more blocks up here, and then more source blocks for water, we should see a considerable amount more, and it is noticeably going faster. Let's see if the EU meter is picking up anything consistent now. 0.16 EU per tick. 0.16. Well, since there's supposed to be about 20 ticks per second, and that looks to be going about 2 EU per second, about somewhere around there, that looks like it would be accurate. Okay, so let's bump it up one more. Let's give this some more water source blocks. And if we measure it again, 0.25 EU per tick. It is definitely going faster. Now we can see that I do have one mistake in here. Because this power cable is so low, we're wasting one block. So let's put another water source block there. And there we have it. So now the Watermill is outputting as much power as physically possible. And according to the EU meter, it's 0.26 EU per tick. Of course, that's not giving us much information right there. And that's negative 13 EU per tick. Let's go with the 0.26 EU per tick. That seems about right with as fast as the EUs are rising. Alrighty, so we can see that the Watermill pulls power from a 3x3 section of water. And that can be shown by doing this. Now this water isn't technically touching the Watermill at all. It's just in a corner. So if we plunk down our cabling, once again we are not drawing power. I thought the whole problem was that it was going up and over. Maybe the watermill wants to float? No. Now it's working. Now we're outputting power. It would seem that sometimes these cables are a little glitchy and they don't recognize that they're attached. So it seems we have to put them down again. But we can see that we're pulling power from this three-dimensional diagonal block of water. And if we put it in all four corners, it's a little faster. So it is absolutely true that it can be a 3x3x3 block, except you're going to lose at least one block of water because the cable has to come out somewhere. So that means that my basement isn't as efficient as it could be. That means I would have to pop all of these, raise these all up one block, and then connect them all back up again. And then from there, it's just adding the water source blocks right there. Just another layer of the water source blocks, and it would take care of the problem. I am still impressed about how exactly fast that this is going. Clean, efficient power. Now, this begs the question, and I brought this up in my video. Does this work with flowing water? And that's what this tutorial started with. Now, first thing we're going to do is make sure that it's actually working, actually being detected by running power to the bat box. See, and it doesn't seem to be working at the moment. So let's pop it and try it again. There we go. Now it's pulling power. Yes. Okay. So let's block that off, and we should not be pulling any more power. And we're not. Good. Now if I pop this block and put water there, this is outside of the 3x3x3 area, so this should also not work. And it's not. It is not working at all. So to test flowing water, we'll pop that block. Now, this is the source block. Hi, sheep. And this is the flowing water. And we can see we are pulling power. Now, let's see if this is all true. We should be pulling, definitely pulling faster power. Well, that's good to know. That means that all I would actually have to do to make this as efficient as possible, well, we're one off. But we got most of the sides. Ah, no we don't. We're missing corners here. Oh well, it doesn't work as well as I thought it would. But it definitely works. So it does work with flowing water. Good to know. So here we can see pretty much the ideal setup for a watermill. Surrounded on all sides except for one with water, and with low voltage cabling going from, or ultra low voltage cabling, excuse me, going from the watermill to the bat box. Now I guess that's a question. does it have to be ultra low current? Can't it be, say, copper cable? I mean, I know that copper cable is a little inefficient sometimes, but no, we are still pulling power. So it doesn't necessarily have to be ultra low current. So it could be copper. How about gold? Gold doesn't seem to work, but we do know that there is a glitch. No, it would appear that gold does not work. Alrighty, but that just leaves us with one that I would even possibly think would work, and that is the glass fiber cable. And the glass fiber cable does work. So it's just the gold that does not. Unless it was just a really big coincidence that every time I laid down the gold cable it was glitched. And that concludes the relatively quick Watermill tutorial. I hope it was as informative for you as it was for me. I definitely learned a lot myself. That's why this is called Learning with Chronno. And as always, keep playing the game and have fun.